Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast. Each week, your host, Casey Hasten, Director of Recruiting at VIP, will bring you valuable insights from thought leaders, introduce you to incredible companies, and bring you tips for landing your dream job from our team of executive recruiters at VIP. And now, Casey Hasten.
Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast, a podcast devoted to adding value to your career or candidate search, brought to you by VIP. I'm your host, Casey Hasten. I'm an executive recruiter, director of recruiting with VIP, and your all-around hiring guru. And you know, this has been such a journey for me. I have had the opportunity to meet so many interesting people, so many people that you wouldn't even know exist. And so today I'm going to introduce you to one of those people, and he has a talent for finding those people that don't exist. So today I'd like to welcome Daniel Hance, the founder and CEO of the Catalyst program. Daniel has over 17 years of military service as a U.S. Army officer and commander. His mission is to enable veterans to find their calling and achieve their full potential. Daniel created the Catalyst program to help military members, veterans, and spouses transition successfully into the civilian sector. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Casey. Always a pleasure to see you.
You know, I think that the way that you and I met, because I always like to talk about connections and how we got connected, was probably one of the more surprising introductions that I believe I've had in a very long time. Do you remember who introduced us?
I can't recall right off the top of my head, but whoever it is, I'm grateful that they did make that introduction.
So it was Brad Zelos.
Yeah.
Marketing. And it was so interesting because I had really kind of just met him at another networking event. And it was one of those things. He's like, there's this guy coming into town. You got to have lunch with him. And I was like, okay. I was like, and it was just one of those gut instinct things. And I mean, we were there for what, 2.5 hours?
Oh, easy. Yeah.
It was amazing. And I want to thank you because it was from that introduction and from us just really getting to know one another that we launched our veteran success through Success North Dallas in partnership with the Catalyst program.
Well, it was, I can tell you that over the last 8 years since we started the Catalyst, I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of amazing folks, but I can tell you that meeting you and really the relationship that we've been building in the time since has just been phenomenal. And so, we're grateful for that opportunity and grateful for, great Americans like yourself to be able to know that, as folks transition out of the military, there is a place for them, that their hard work and fruits and labors wasn't in vain, despite what they might perceive otherwise before they get out.
And, being the mom of a veteran that recently transitioned out, I think that's probably one of the reasons. I think I would have been drawn to this anyway, but I think having gone through that experience of watching my son struggle through that transition from veteran to civilian, I was just like, and I was beside myself. And thank God there was a member of our community, Jen Colby, that stepped up, who's now your team lead with Veteran Success, that stepped up and said, let me just take over, Casey. I got this. I know what to do here. And I'm like, okay, you go be mom for a year because I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I hope she doesn't see this, but I'm sure she will. She's amazing. She is, and it pains me as a former Army officer to say that about an Air Force officer, but no, Jen is the real deal. She is the living embodiment of what success is, but also what grit and determination, coupled with being smart and what that can lead to, as long as you're not willing to settle. And it is. She is what we refer to in the military as a force multiplier. So she's someone that can get a lot of things accomplished with a lot of different people in a very short period of time. And I'm always, don't tell her this, but I'm always humbled to be around her because she's better than me in so many ways.
This is a completely different side of you than what I see when we're in our team meetings. It's just like everybody's just like, I'm like, I need to push mute here. This is bad.
Yeah, well, it's very much a brother or a sister and brotherly love thing. She's amazing, as is her husband, and they're two beautiful boys. So,
Yes.
you know, again, I'm very grateful for the quality of people that I've met through you and Success North Dallas. So, I want to continue to build that for a very long time.
Well, we are so grateful to have met you as well because that was the missing piece that we needed to kickstart that initiative. So we thank you as much as you thank us. It's a joint effort. But so I know you're passionate about helping others navigate, from the military to civilian transition. So, but I mean, you were once that person, right? So tell me a little bit about your experience and, was it difficult? What was it like for you?
Yeah, no, great question. So actually, I navigated this three different times and in three different facets. Originally, so I grew up a military brat. My father was literally a coal miner in Kentucky who was told by the girl he wanted to marry, "Hey, you need to step it up." And so he ended up becoming a Russian and German linguist during the height of the Cold War.
Wow.
Was later sent to undergrad to get his bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in electrical and mechanical engineering. He worked for two very prominent three-letter agencies. And when he got out, I saw him become something other than what he was, the man that he'd worked so hard to become. And so that was my first engagement with the transition process and just how, quite frankly, appalling it is.
Mm.
Next, then later on, I joined the military after swearing I never would because of seeing what my father went through because of September 11th. And I was a failed college athlete. And,
I didn't know that.
oh yeah, emphasis on the failed. But I went, I saw on September 11th, I saw some brave men and women just step up whenever the country needed them to. And I said, that's who and what I wanted to become because I was the furthest thing from it. So I enlisted. And then a few years later, after doing a nasty tour to Iraq, I was then kind of transitioned back into academia because I was selected to become an officer. And that was brutal, to go from literally, engaging with senior executives in the military, as well as official government officials, and even civilian contracting executives, to now being told all of those experiences are worth 12 credit hours towards physical education. It was very denigrating. And so that got me thinking, then, hey, there's got to be a better way for this. And then again, years later, transitioning out then as an officer, again, it was brutal. And I was fortunate enough, I got to go to two Fortune 5 companies and had some really cool, quote unquote, leadership or really management roles. But even then, it was not intrinsically fulfilling, and that's what I was seeking more than anything else. And so, bottom line, it was, and then I looked around and I saw easily 1,000 of my closest friends, men and women who I looked up to in the military, who had transitioned out, who had just as bad, if not worse, transitions than myself. And so that's when I made the decision, no, there's got to be a better way, and I'll figure it out.
Wow. And from what I'm hearing and what I'm learning, that's pretty standard.
You've lived it. Yeah, it is. It's and it's an abomination. We've asked men and women to sacrifice their lives, literally, and everything that we hold dear, and put their lives on the line day in and day out, only to say, hey, thanks for your service, and cast them aside. And that's horrendous business. And so, regardless of who you are, that transition process, well, it's for some are very fortunate and are able to transition out well, but that's not the majority, and the data shows that. And so, the bottom line is there's far better ways to do things, and that's what we focus on.
Well, and we are so grateful you're there to, reach down a hand to help those that are transitioning out. But, for those that may be listening to the podcast that are still in the military right now, maybe they're 2-3 years away from transitioning out. So when should members of the military really begin to focus on their plans for life after the military?
The day they enlist.
Wow.
Well, I've had this conversation, so you know who we were and the units that we work with.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that conversation with the actual commanders of those units, and these are legitimately the most competent battlefield commanders ever to walk the earth. They've told me the exact same thing. And even though that's not emphasized and we're still a ways from doing that successfully, and I say that as a military community, the reality is folks need to, and that's one thing that the military does exceptionally well, is it provides people a purpose, and from a intrinsic value point of view. They're looking for something bigger than themselves. I know I was when I joined the military, and the data, statistically shows that the vast majority of folks that become, U.S. troops feel the exact same way. But it's when they get out, or that's process of starting to get out, that they start to self-denigrate themselves, or they allow society to do the same thing. And so the reality is, the sooner rather than later, they need to understand that, there is an expiration date in the military. Most, some folks it's 20, some folks it's 10 years, some folks it's 20 years, other folks it's 40 years. But at the end of the day, that does come. And so they need to be prepared and start preparing sooner rather than later.
When it came to my son, his was not unexpected. He actually wanted to be a career in the Air Force, and unfortunately, he got to a point where he was medically discharged. So it still took a little bit to do that. So, let's say that you had planned to stay in the military, and now you've just been told, I'm sorry, that's not going to work out for you. So, what are the first 3 priorities a person should look to establish and conquer when they're making that transition to civilian life?
Great question. So the first thing they need to do is find their support system and understand that support system can evolve. It's great. A lot of folks will revert back to their former leadership or friends. We refer to them as battle buddies, folks that they served in the military with for guidance, and that's great. You don't want to lose that, but the reality is you have to be proactive, and you need to start looking at what we tell folks is, and that's part of the program, is we introduce folks to folks that have come before them who are now titans of industry, and cut through the weeds of saying, hey, look, this is how I got to where I'm at, but success doesn't look like, this is how I went from being you 30 years ago to being the CEO of Sports Clips, or the CEO of a $20 million IT consulting company. But success doesn't look like this. It looks like this. And at the end of the day, you're capable of accomplishing what I have, but here's what you need to know. And it's paramount that these folks understand that just like they did in the military, you have to, its growth is a process, but you have to seek out those folks that are willing to give you some of their time and their knowledge, because that's paramount, as well as family. If you're fortunate enough to have that, a lot of folks don't, but certainly seek out that and create that new support system, and be transparent of, hey, this is what I'm going through. Can you please help me? Another thing I would also implore them to do is to, what we ask everybody through the Catalyst program is, and we preface, take your time in answering this. You have to answer this for yourself intrinsically. But the bottom line is if you could do anything business related for a year for free, what would that be and why? And the reason we pose that question is, again, our, veterans, especially folks that have served since September 11th, are genuinely very intrinsically motivated. They want a purpose higher than themselves. And that's hard to find in the civilian space, but it's absolutely there. It's absolutely there, and it's absolutely paramount that they find that. But also that thing of, hey, listen, I've never done this before, and it kind of scares me. The data also shows that that's actually where folks want to be, because they're acclimated to that from their life in the military. And the last thing I would also say is, you're absolutely, compose that internal list and that of dialogue, or with your family, of, hey, I'm not willing to settle, and I'm not willing to accept X, Y, and Z, because again, that is a prevalent problem. It's a systemic problem that has metastasized into such a catastrophic effect that's the reason why the suicide rates are what they are. And people think it's the younger folks who are only in for a shorter period of time. Actually, the data shows it's the highest performers, or extremely high performers in the military, are the folks who are more likely to make those awful decisions, because they're so purpose and intrinsically driven, and then they start settling, and that's not who and what they are. And so that would be my long-winded answer to your question.
And I think that's perfect. And I think the second piece of advice that you gave about, I think that applies across everybody, not just the military. Think about what you would do related to business for a year for free, and then go get that and get paid for it. Right? I mean,
right.
I wish that they would teach even our college students this, because once you find your passion, you don't work a day in your life. And I did want to share, just to kind of to what you were saying, and I'm sure this can be extrapolated across all the military branches, but I was talking to a Navy SEAL the other day that had been in the SEALs for 22 years. And his platform today is raising awareness about the suicide rate of these elite performers, because he said more of the SEALs die from self-exiting, from suicide, than are actually killed in combat.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, that's now across the board. It's not just the SEAL community. It's the other, not only special operations community. It's even the conventional side. I worked for some, when I was enlisted, and even as an officer, I worked for some folks that males and females that were officers or even senior enlisted at the time, who I just idolized, and I still do. But unfortunately, several have made that decision that they can't come back from, and that's something, that's the world we live in, and it doesn't have to be that way. And to your point, about the college exploration, that's what the Catalyst does. We show them not only who's out there and what's out there, but what they can do, and how they've been doing it in bits and pieces all along, but how to take it to the next echelon. And we get down to brass tacks, but because that's how our folks, and that's how they're most successful. They're built to be successful.
So, and before, I do want to talk about the Catalyst program and dive into that a little bit deeper. But before we do, I kind of have a two-part question for you. So, number one, I know a lot of times employers don't see the value in hiring veterans. They're like, you don't have X amount of experience, and they don't see how it translates. So that's my first part of the question. And the second part is, if they do see that value, how do they help those veterans how do they help ease that transition for them into the civilian workspace?
Great question. So to your point, yes, most civilian companies, have no clue what the profound talent that today's transitioning veterans provide them. Yes. But the irony is so here's some data for you. 33% of all of veterans, post 9/11 era veterans, are more likely to be underemployed than our civilian counterparts. However, we are actually 90% more likely to be successful in our roles than our civilian counterparts. And we're 9% more likely to stay in a role or with that company for a longer duration. Additionally, and this Forbes, and that's all you can extrapolate that data from LinkedIn. But Forbes did some studies about 10 years ago now that they published, I believe, in 2017. But they said, okay, who were the most successful C-suite executives, senior executives, and entrepreneurs in this country the last 50 years? The overwhelming response were veterans who had leadership experience. Additionally, they found that we were 83% less likely to be embroiled in scandal. And we had a longer tenure in senior executive roles by, I believe, almost a year and a half than our civilian counterparts. So that's, I would implore, that's really why it's so important that civilian companies, civilian-led companies understand they're throwing away great talent before they ever walk in the door. And so there, again, it's do the work and understand that it's beyond a tax write-off. It's legitimately, hey, you want growing power, you want your company brand elevation, hire the right veterans for you. And inversely, your second question, what companies can continue to do is, or what we see in companies that do well, we have a lot of PE companies that are coming to us saying, hey, look, I want my leaders from the Catalyst because of their backgrounds. We get a lot of, honestly, financial institutions, banks, credit unions, and now wealth management. We're getting a lot of interest there. We also, we've had tremendous success in supply chain and marketing, specifically brand marketing, brand management. And those are just, and consulting. Because the bottom line is while all of those are growth industries and business segments, the folks have been doing those all along, especially if they've served any time the last 20 years or since September 11th. And understand that, not only where their own internal company mission is going, but having that career path, that trajectory, because veterans are we're far more likely to be loyal to the company. We kind of going back to staying with an organization longer than our civilian counterparts. One of the biggest differences, and I'm trying to remember what publication found these results, but bottom line, they found that the biggest differentiator between veterans and our civilian counterparts is when we're looking at an organization, we're looking at one, what is the mission? Does that mission intrinsically align with my personal value system? And then two, what is the leadership? Is it true leadership? Can I come in and not only utilize my skills starting day one to start helping that organization grow and get to where they want to be and align that vision, but also where's the senior leadership going? Are they doing the right things? And historically, unfortunately, veterans don't get that opportunity, or even civilians don't get that opportunity until they've been on the job for a little while. And that's that's not the way to do business going forward. So did I answer your questions?
I think so. So let's talk a little bit about the Catalyst program, because I know that you provide educational services to those elite veterans in partnership with some of the top universities in the U.S. What are some of the core curriculums that you've implemented through the Catalyst program?
Yes, ma'am. Well, so the first week is really predicated on that successful intrinsic transition. So for me, I was a captain. I was enlisted for the first half of my career, then an officer the last half of my career. I was fortunate enough to have command experience and did a little bit of cool things, but compared to a lot of the candidates that we have matriculated our program, I'm nothing. But the reality is the first rule of effective leadership is know thyself. And so that's what we do, is we help our candidates, matriculants, understand what their they always talk about worth. What we always talk about is your profound net present value. So say what you want to say about the military, but at the end of the day, it's absolutely a business. It's just unique industry. And so what we do is we help them, we start pulling that out of them and then showing them where and how that applies across every growth industry and business segment there is in the world today. And so that lays that successful foundation, because that starts elevating them. That starts getting them back to being still, they're no longer the sergeant major or captain or colonel, but they're still Sally, Casey, and Dan, right? But their skills transfer a long way. So helping them to understand that in a fraction of the time, that lays that platform for all the rest of the learning to come. And then from there, another key thing that we do is we bring in some senior marketing consultants or experts who have, were either veterans or have a tie to the military themselves, so they know the immense talent that they're engaged with. So they're not denigrating their time or their talent, but they're helping them understand how they've been consulting all along, but again, how to take it to that next echelon. That's a key component. Marketing, especially with brand management. Hey, they know how to win hearts and minds on the battlefield. This is how you do it through the cash flow statements and the balance sheet. And how you take that skill to a higher echelon. And then also, a mutual good friend of ours, we bring in former Wall Street exec who has done extremely well for himself. And Dr. Kevin Koharki comes in and teaches our candidates how to become self-made millionaires through strategic investing, both on a personal stage as well as on a managerial stage or platform. And so we really focus on knowing what's important to our candidates, not just today, but going forward. And I think that we're always looking at evolving the curriculum, but those are ones that definitely drive home a lot of great applicants.
And we've actually had Kevin on the podcast in the past. So if anybody wants to go back and you say his last name, because I always butcher it.
Yeah, it's Kevin Koharki, Koharki.
Yeah, so it's just like it sounds just like it's spelled, but I don't know. It just like trips my tongue up. I don't know.
Yeah, just Dr. Kev.
And I didn't know he was a doctor.
Oh yeah, he's Kevin's the real deal. He was a guy who went to Wall Street out of college, and after he tried out for the NFL, he went to Wall Street and killed it on Wall Street, and then was very successful, and then had enough, had earned the right and the financial backing to say, hey, I want to go in and I want to change the way that academics do things and how they teach kids. And so he went in, got his MBA and his PhD through Penn State. And
just that school.
Yeah, just that school. But yeah, he's a stud. He's the real deal. But he's also a gentleman that tells them, hey, look, I did this. You can too. But this is what cuts out all the ethereal crap and focuses on the true application. And that resonates extremely well with our candidates.
And they learn how to read the financials, which even if you're not in the accounting department, if you're in a leadership role, you need to learn how to look at those P&Ls and balance sheets. So important. So what is one piece of advice that you received when making the transition to civilian life you'd want to share with other veterans who are about to make the same journey?
Be careful with who you surround yourself by. So I was very fortunate years ago when we started, right before we started the Catalyst. I was fortunate. I was in Cincinnati at the time, living in Cincinnati at the time. And because of my wife, I had access to, my wife's a former Procter & Gamble executive. I had access to some people that, quite frankly, I shouldn't have been hanging around with. But one of the things that a gentleman who happened to, was a Marine veteran himself in World War II, had subsequently gotten out and had created a company that became a Fortune 100 company, was at the same venue, and he heard me give a conversation or give a talk. And I was talking about networking and the power of networking. And I came off stage and, people were clapping and I thought I did well. At the time, long time ago, I was still in shape, but he was nearing 80 years old, and he snatched me up and he said, "What are you doing?" And he flat out told me, he's like, "Look," he's like, why are you talking about networking? And he told me, he said, listen, he said, look at every single person there in this room. And it was a very impressive group. And I was the only person there that wasn't. And he flat out told me, he's like, look, everybody here focuses on relationships and relationship building. He said, amateurs network, professionals, we build relationships and we cultivate them for the rest of our lives. And it really, and then he would delve further. He's like, look, he's like, you can't, again, going back to the conversation we had just a little while ago is, you're not in the military anymore. You're now a civilian and you're trying to become a successful businessman. Surround yourself with other businessmen that are better than you in different ways, and women in different ways, and that you can learn from. But a key part of that is, he told me, he said, drop the ego, because the most successful people that he had met were people that came from a perspective of, what can I do for you, as opposed to what can you do for me? Yep. And that if I could figure out a way through my own style to make that work, that would yield phenomenal ROI, return on investment. That has been my mantra every moment since that day. And that's something that we really push to our candidates is, hey, listen, that's great. You are a super secret squirrel at the highest level, tier 1 level. That's fantastic. Your entire career has been in special operations. You've worked for some agencies. You're a Harvard grad. That's great. At the end of the day, it's, what are you going to do next, right? And how are you going to do that? And you've done phenomenal things, and let's build upon that. But that world has led you to where you're at today. Your character and your competence is what's going to carry you to where you're truly capable and want to be on the civilian side. And so I would say those would be of the highest, best advice that I've received yet.
That's pretty good. And again, that's not just for the veterans. That goes across the board. I don't care what your industry, your age, that applies to everyone. So we are almost out of time, but I do want to ask you at least one of our 3 VIP questions. So let me see. What do I want to know about you? I think I want to know this question, the answer to this question. What is one thing you do each morning to set your day up for success?
So I've admittedly gotten away from it a little bit last year, but being around who we work with, it's definitely a staple for my life, and I got back after it today. But the first thing I do every morning is workout. For me, it's encoded in my DNA. And so, not just from my time in the military, but as a kid, I wrestled competitively. And then when I got into the military, you just work out, 2 or 3 times a day. But starting my day off by challenging myself, especially when I don't want to, especially when, everything hurts, which is all the time, every day nowadays.
Don't even get me started on that.
You look great. But, for me, truthfully, it's getting up, and it doesn't have to be deadlifting and kettlebells and everything, which is what I did today. But tomorrow, honestly, I'll jump on an elliptical and I'll do a 45-minute just steady state cardio workout and stretch afterwards. And I feel like, and I've already set myself up for success for the day. And it helps me see things clear, helps me work through my own personal demons, which truthfully, are definitely always there and profound. But it allows me to know that, 1, I'm still alive, 2, I'm still getting after it, and 3, it allows me to just settle.
I love that. And I think movement in the morning is so important. I'm not saying I do it, but I do think it's important, It's like, do I meditate or do I exercise this morning? I'm going to meditate.
And that is so same thing. Like for me, the two are really one and the same, because I use my time in the gym. I typically work out by myself, but I do get some young men that want to go into the military that come in and join me from time to time. But I use my time in the gym as my meditation time, because it's a way for me to it's a way for me to work through what I've seen, because I can't unsee it. But it allows me to also build that gratitude that is paramount to keep going, and do things better. So no, I love that. I love that meditation.
So how do people find you if they are interested in the Catalyst program, or maybe they want to refer somebody?
Yes, ma'am. Well, thecatalystprogram.org. It's pithy, we know. But yeah, you can find us at thecatalystprogram.org. Or if you just want to Google the Catalyst military transition, the Catalyst program military transition, those are, two prominent ways to find us. But yeah, and I know we talked a lot about special operations and whatnot, but we have candidates that matriculate into our program who are, as you said before, who are currently serving in conventional units on active duty, folks who are in the reserves, folks who are in the National Guard, and even some select spouses. And here, the last couple of years, we've had a few folks who have been out. We had one gentleman who had been out of the military for 20 years and had not, and he had a master's degree from NYU in management. And he just, when we met Glenn, he just wasn't intrinsically fulfilled. And then he came through our program, and now he is. But yeah, those are two prominent ways of finding us.
That is so awesome. I could talk to you all day, my friend, but we are going to have to wrap this up. So I have just one last thing to say to you.
Yes, ma'am.
You are a VIP.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for today. Join us next week here on the We Are VIP podcast. We'd love to know how we can help you be a VIP. To find out more, log on to wearevip.com.